Dude, I can't wait to go see that on my mom's birthday without her.
If there's not a minion that looks at Mario and go banana,
And Mario
was it
punch.
really worth watching?
Yo, what? No way! Yes!
I love the Super Mario series. It was one of my favorite video game series growing up, with Super Mario Galaxy being probably the first game I ever played, and to this day it still holds a special place in my heart, with some of its games being among my favorites of all time. However, despite my liking for the game series, my opinions on the Mario movies have always been a bit inconsistent. Well, it has been for the animated ones at least. That live action one has always been trash to me. I remember enjoying the first animated Mario film when I saw it on its opening day, but that was over 3 years ago, and my opinions on it and my taste in films has changed drastically since then. Nowadays, I consider it to be a lot more flawed than I initially thought. And with its sequel, the Super Mario Galaxy movie, releasing this month, I thought now would be the perfect time to review both of these movies, and explain why I find them to be underwhelming films. Now, before we begin, I want to quickly preface that, firstly, this video contains mild spoilers for the Super Mario Galaxy movie, so if you haven't seen it yet, watch it first and then come back later if you don't want to get spoiled. And secondly, at the end of the day, this is all just my opinion. You're free to disagree with it, and if you enjoy these films, more power to you. But with that being said, why don't we stop beating around the bush and get on with these reviews? Starting of course with the first film, the Super Mario Bros. Movie. I remember how much of a roller coaster the lead up to the Super Mario Bros. Movie release was back in the day. From the initial casting announcements that left the entire internet seemingly baffled, to the rollout of the first few trailers, to the controversy surrounding the first few reviews, all the way up to the film finally dropping on the 5th of April 2023. Despite this though, it turned out to be mostly well received upon release, with Mario fans rejoicing that they finally had a game-accurate movie that wasn't a total abomination, and general audiences enjoying it for being a light but fun family film. However, there was also a large group of people who disliked it, and it seems as though that group has gotten larger and larger over the past 3 years, creating a bit of a divide among fans on the internet. And nowhere is this divide better exemplified than with the film's infamous Rotten Tomatoes score. Now, if you somehow don't know what Rotten Tomatoes is, basically it's a website that tracks and displays what percentage of its user base liked a movie or TV show, whilst also separating its user base into two distinct groups: actual proper film critics and your average moviegoers. Though commonly disliked by most people online, Rotten Tomatoes is still used by millions every day, as it can be useful as a metric to determine a film's quality. However, sometimes it can also demonstrate the major difference in how films are received by different audiences, as was the case with the Mario movie. On the one hand, the percentage of the general audience who enjoyed it is very high, coming in at 95%, indicating that for people who don't care about the finer details of film and just want a fun movie to watch, it was a hit. But on the other hand, there's the percentage of critics who liked it, which is only 59%, implying that for people who view films more critically and care more about actual substance, it's more of a mixed bag. This, I think, perfectly demonstrates why this film's reputation online is so mixed. Any discussion around it always turns into a battle between people who argue that it's alright, and that it didn't need to be a great movie as long as it was game accurate and a fun watch, versus people who argue it should have been an actually good movie first and foremost. But what do I think? Which side do I fall on? Well, as someone who enjoys both film and the Mario series, I can confidently say that I fall more towards the critical side of the discussion. As a result, it's probably not surprising to hear that I don't really like this film that much, for a few different reasons. Firstly, let's talk about the story. Now, I don't want what I'm about to say to come across as though I'm asking too much from a film that is ultimately made primarily for a very young demographic. I'm definitely not asking for some super complex or deep story on the same level as The Godfather. However, I do think that, at the bare minimum, the story in this film should have been at least decent. Because in my opinion, having a lackluster story not only removes any substance from your film, it also just makes it really boring. You need at least something small to chew on to make the experience worthwhile. And in this aspect, the Mario movie sorely lacks. Its plot and story are paper thin and incredibly weak. And personally, I'm tired of all the excuses people give them for being such. Oh well, it doesn't need that much story because it's Mario, and Mario games have always been light on story. Yeah, because they're video games. Their main focus is not to impress you with their stories, but to give you endless hours of fun with their gameplay. The Mario games are allowed to have basically no plot because the medium they are in does not prioritize storytelling. Film, however, is primarily a storytelling medium, so when adapting a game franchise for the big screen, you gotta put more effort into the story. Oh well, it's just a kids movie, so we don't need to put that much effort in. Get real. Kids movies, despite being aimed at such a young demographic, can have great stories. And anyone making a kids movie should still aim to make the story they're telling good. Just because kids' perception of quality is less developed doesn't mean that they deserve less. Again, you don't need to write anything complex or some Oscar-worthy script. You just need something of any real note to latch onto when watching. The Mario movie doesn't have a weak story because it didn't necessitate it. It has a weak story because the writers were being lazy when they wrote it. Secondly, the characters here are a mixed bag at best. For starters, Mario and Peach, despite being basically the protagonists of the film, are as flat as a plank of wood. Mario is a boring main character to follow because he has no real personality to latch onto. And I know he's never been a character with a particularly strong personality, but they could have given him something here that would have made him at least entertaining to watch. Additionally, his character arc of wanting to prove himself, while not being an awful idea on paper, even if it is a bit generic, is executed in a pretty basic way that isn't all that interesting. As for Peach, while I think it was absolutely the right decision to make her a more proactive and empowered character in this movie, since reducing her down to just a damsel in distress Mario needs to save, like how she's been in a lot of the games, would have been an outdated and sexist idea, I wish they also tried a bit harder to give her an actual personality as well. As is, she doesn't really have anything beyond some very basic traits. So like Mario, she's also pretty boring and uninteresting. Thankfully though, I do like how they handled Bowser and Luigi's personalities. Bowser is a fun antagonist, being a good mix of intimidating and incredibly goofy at the same time. And Luigi's characterization is on point throughout the film. I only wish he was in it for more than 10 minutes. Yeah, that's one really weird thing this film does. As I've already mentioned, it's clear that the writers didn't want to have Peach kidnapped in this film. However, they still for some reason wanted to include the plotline of someone needing to be rescued, so instead they have Luigi be the one who gets kidnapped and held hostage for most of the movie, which is such an odd decision. I don't know why they couldn't have just not done the whole kidnapping thing, since if you took it out, the plot probably wouldn't have been affected that much. All it does is just rob Luigi of screen time, since he spends most of the movie in prison, which sucks because he's one of the only characters I actually like, and because I think that in the Super Mario Brothers movie, both of the Mario brothers should have been active in the plot. Anyway, as for the last two main characters, I don't really like Donkey Kong here that much. He's a little annoying, though with that being said, he's a hell of a lot more tolerable than Toad. I hate Toad in this movie. All he does is just be obnoxious and loud and nothing else. He's a poor excuse for a comic relief character, and I also really don't like the voice Keegan-Michael Key is doing here. Speaking of which, I suppose now is as good a time as any to talk about one of the film's most infamous qualities, the cast. We all had a good laugh when they were first announced in that fateful Nintendo Direct, but now that we've actually got to see them in action, how did they do? Were they right for the parts? Probably not. Chris Pratt as Mario. I mean, he could have been a lot worse, I suppose. My main issue with this casting doesn't even come down to the fact he sounds nothing like Mario, but more just because it's very evident that he isn't really trying. His delivery sounds like he's doing the bare minimum needed to get his paycheck and leave, which I guess isn't that surprising. What is surprising is how weak Anya Taylor-Joy is as Peach. I actually think she's a pretty good actress, but she just sounds really bored in the recording booth here. As I've already mentioned, I don't like the voice Keegan-Michael Key is putting on here, and Seth Rogen as Donkey Kong was fine, I guess. Once again, Luigi and Bowser's backs are tired from carrying this film, because I think by far the best out of this cast are Charlie Day and Jack Black, who actually do pretty good jobs as their characters. They're the highlights in an otherwise pretty mediocre cast, which I guess is fitting for a pretty mediocre movie. Finally, I want to briefly mention this film's pacing. Even when I watched this film for the first time back in 2023, back when I was a much less critical young man, I remember thinking, yeah, the pacing of this movie is kinda whack. It's way too fast, to the point of feeling jarring. It's not like they even have a lot they need to get through, so I'm not really sure why this is an issue. Now, even though I've done nothing but complain in this review so far, I don't want it to come across as though I didn't like anything in this movie, because there are actually quite a few things I liked about it. They don't make up for the issues with the story, and ultimately don't save it from being a subpar film, but they're still noteworthy. Overall, I'd say it's a well-made film, and I think the easiest thing to praise about it is the animation. It's downright gorgeous, and even if I'm not entertained whatsoever when watching this because of the story, I can always count on the film to deliver some delicious looking eye candy. The score is also great. I love how almost every track mixes in melodies from all across the Mario series, making the soundtrack feel like a loving tribute to all things Mario. Speaking of tributes, that brings me to the last thing I want to talk about here. The references. This film is chock full of as many references to the Mario series as they can muster, and in a vacuum, I really like them. They show that the team behind the movie clearly had a lot of reverence for the series, and it's enjoyable picking them all out on your first viewing. However, I also believe they're a bit of a double-edged sword, because once you realize that the movie has nothing of substance to offer outside of these references, they start to feel a little disingenuous. They start to feel less like they were put in because the film crew were genuinely passionate about them, and more so that they could provoke as many reactions out of the audience as possible to distract them from how mediocre the rest of the film was. I know that's most likely not true, but the thought did cross my mind on my most recent viewing. In conclusion, outside of being a mostly faithful adaptation to the source material, the first Mario movie is pretty lackluster. I found myself really bored by it upon rewatch, which maybe wouldn't have been the case if they actually bothered to make a half-decent story and cast of characters. Now, it isn't outright awful by any means, but I do feel comfortable in saying that it's at the very least pretty bad. I might change this score depending on how I'm feeling on any given day, but for now, I'm probably going to give this a 4 out of 10. But hey, that's just the first Mario movie. What about this new Mario Galaxy movie that just came out? Is it any better? God, I hope so. Why don't we take a look and find out if this sequel actually turned out alright, or if it was somehow worse. The Mario Galaxy movie is a movie that exists. For all intents and purposes, this is basically just the same as the first film in terms of its quality, with the same pros and cons rearing their ugly head again. Because of this, I don't think I need to spend as long explaining why this film was underwhelming. Once again, the music and animation are easily the best bits, and I feel exactly the same way about the abundance of references here as I did in the first film. The story is also bare bones and boring like last time, which is arguably even more offensive this time around, given that they had time in between films to actually improve upon the first film's flaws, but instead chose not to. Admittedly though, there is one thing here that I think is done better than in its predecessor, and it may just be the thing that makes this new installment the tiniest bit better than the last, and that is the pacing. While it's still not amazing, and still pretty fast overall, it's not nearly as jarring or distracting this time around, and I didn't find myself being bothered by it as much. It's a small improvement, but also a welcome one. Enough about that though. How are the characters in this film? We have quite a lot of them this time around. Some would say too many. And the execution of all their storylines is once again a mixed bag. On the one hand, the returning cast, while still being pretty flat overall, are perhaps done better here too, with characters like Peach and Bowser having a bit more going on that makes their storylines fine enough to watch. I also wasn't nearly as annoyed by Toad in this one. I'm glad they toned him down to make him less insufferable. But on the other hand, the new characters kinda get the short end of the stick. For being such a huge part of the marketing for this film, Yoshi just kinda exists in this film. Like, yeah, he's there. He doesn't really do a whole lot, and could have been entirely removed without any change. But he's there. Admittedly, Donald Glover does a pretty good job voicing him, even though I'm still not entirely sure why they even casted him for this. But that's about it. Bowser Jr. is also just kinda there, and should have had a way bigger presence in the story than he does as is. Then finally, there's Fox McCloud, the first non-Mario Nintendo character to be included in one of these films. and I actually really like him here. He's a charismatic and funny character, with a good performance by Glenn Powell backing him up. And it was cool how they decided to include him despite coming from a different franchise. Although, with that being said, it would have been way cooler if he was a surprise character I didn't know was going to be in the film beforehand. Thanks for spoiling that one before the film even came out, guys. And with that, I think I've talked about every major new character in this movie. I think that's all of them. Don't think I'm forgetting anyone. Oh yeah, Rosalina's in this movie too! I almost forgot she was even here, which I guess is understandable. The writers also forgot she existed too. By far my biggest criticism of this film is how it handles the character of Rosalina. In the Mario games, she's probably one of my favourite characters, and she plays a huge part in the narrative of the original Mario Galaxy game. So I was really looking forward to seeing how she was going to be incorporated into this film. And boy was I disappointed. You know how a major problem with the last film was how Luigi was only in it for like 10 minutes? Well, that problem is even worse here, because if I'm being honest, I don't even think Rosalina gets more than 5 minutes of screen time. She's completely wasted here, being captured by Bowser Jr. in the opening scene, appearing only one more time shortly afterwards in the following scene, and then disappearing from the movie entirely until the very end. Reminder, this is a film based on Super Mario Galaxy, the game that Rosalina debuted and played a big role in, and she has less screen time than Fox McCloud, a non-Mario character, and Wart, a character who has only appeared in one Mario game nearly 40 years ago. She literally doesn't get to do anything outside of the opening scene. This character with a really cool backstory and lore in the games is nothing more than a plot device in this movie, which is incredibly frustrating. What makes it even worse is how this sidelining also completely wastes her voice actress, Brie Larson. Why on earth would you cast an Academy Award-winning actress who is a huge and incredibly passionate fan of your series if you were gonna do this to her character? She and Rosalina deserved so much better in this film, and it's by far the film's biggest failing that they aren't used more. Before I wrap things up, I want to briefly discuss one more thing that I thought was a little strange about this film. This isn't really a major issue with the movie, but it's also something I've thought about a lot when I was watching it. Why is this even called the Super Mario Galaxy movie? Because for the most part, this doesn't really feel much like a Galaxy movie at all. There is definitely a lot of stuff from Galaxy in here, like the general concept and theme of space exploration. But they're also balanced out by so many set pieces and elements taken from completely different Mario games that almost overshadow them at points. The film also doesn't capture the vibe of the game much either. In my opinion, this probably should have been given a more generic title like The Super Mario Bros. Movie 2, because marketing this solely as a Galaxy movie feels a bit dishonest. Overall, the Mario Galaxy movie isn't that much of a step up from the Mario Bros. Movie. I'm honestly kinda shocked just how many things were exactly on par with how they were in the first film. For better, and mostly for worse. I really hope these films don't stay this consistent brand of mediocrity forever, and that they actually do try and put some more effort into improving things next time around, given how this film seems to be getting even worse reviews than the last one. But then again, I know I probably shouldn't be expecting anything out of the studio like Illumination, who historically have not been known to really care about improving their films as long as they make money. For now though, I'm gonna give the Super Mario Galaxy movie the same score I gave the previous film. 4 out of 10. Altogether, I think it's fair to say that Mario had a bit of a rough transition to the silver screen. Although these films make billions of dollars each time they come out, and do relatively well with hardcore Nintendo fans and general audiences, for me and a lot of other people, they're neither great nor what we want out of a Mario film series. It's a shame, because I think if these films actually tried to tell good stories, combined with their faithfulness to the source material, they would make for some genuinely great video game movies. Like I said though, I don't imagine these Illumination Mario films will be improving anytime soon as long as they keep making stack loads of cash. Which, of course they will. It's Mario. You can literally slap his face onto any product and people will buy it. They'll probably keep pumping them out till the end of time, and something tells me only 1 or 2 of them will end up being any good. By the way, I'm calling it now, that third movie is probably going to be related to Super Mario Land in some way. Apparently Daisy was featured in a post-credit scene in the Mario Galaxy movie that I missed, who obviously debuted in the original Super Mario Land. So that's already a strong indicator that they'll go in that direction. I also expect Wario might make an appearance since he debuted in the sequel, and maybe they could also throw in Waluigi too and theme the film around the idea of counterparts. The plot will probably be Wario kidnapping Daisy so that he can steal her kingdom's wealth or something, and the Mario brothers will have to fight him to get her back. That's what I think will happen anyway. For now though, regardless of what your opinion on these films are, I think we can all agree that films are one of the only areas where Sonic completely outdoes his former rival. For now at least. And if you've made it this far into the video, I just want to say thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like, and comment your thoughts on the Mario movies. If you want to, you should also consider subscribing if you want to hear me ramble about more of my random interests in the future.